The rain poured relentlessly through the dark night as two young women arrived at the doorstep of a quiet house, asking for help. Their clothes were completely soaked, and their innocent expressions made them seem harmless. Without thinking twice, an architect named Evan welcomed them inside. He handed them towels and tried to make them comfortable. While they changed and freshened up, he walked into the kitchen and prepared hot tea. Everything seemed normal, but slowly, the atmosphere inside the house began to change. When Belle and Genesis returned to the living room, Evan immediately felt uncomfortable. He quietly moved to another chair, trying to create some distance. To avoid the awkward silence, he asked what they did for a living. The girls smiled and said they were flight attendants, constantly traveling around the world. As they shared stories from different countries, they kept flirting with him, hoping he would finally give in. But Evan was a married man. He loved his wife, Karen, and refused to cross the line. No matter how hard they tried, he kept reminding himself that this was just one strange night, and the cab would arrive soon. Then Evan checked his phone. Only 20 minutes were left before the taxi arrived. Evan glanced at his phone once again. Only 5 minutes remained before the cab would arrive. Just then, Genesis smiled and excused herself, saying she needed to use the bathroom. The moment she walked away, Belle quietly moved closer to Evan. She sat beside him, far closer than before. She smiled, touched his arm, and kept trying to pull him into a conversation that felt more personal than friendly. Evan politely leaned back, clearly trying to keep his distance. At that exact moment, his phone rang. It was the taxi driver. The cab is outside. Relieved, Evan thanked him and told Belle to call Genesis so they could leave. Belle walked toward the bathroom, while Evan went to collect their clothes from the dryer. Minutes passed, but neither of them came out. Confused, Evan slowly walked toward the bathroom and knocked on the door. No answer. He knocked again. Still complete silence. After a brief hesitation, he slowly turned the handle and stepped inside. What he saw instantly froze him. Belle and Genesis were standing there, completely undressed. Neither of them looked surprised. Instead, they stared directly into Evan's eyes, almost as if they had been waiting for him to open that door. Evan immediately looked away and tried to leave. He knew this was wrong. He reminded himself of his wife, his family, everything he could lose. But the girls didn't let him walk away. They stepped closer. They kept tempting him, pushing him further and further, until the line between right and wrong began to blur. For a few moments, Evan fought to control himself. Then he made the biggest mistake of his life. That one decision changed everything.
Morning finally arrived. Evan woke up feeling exhausted, expecting the two girls to be gone. At first, the house was completely silent. He looked around and couldn't find Belle or Genesis anywhere. For a second, he felt relieved. Maybe they had left during the night. But then, a burst of laughter echoed through the house. It was coming from the kitchen. Evan rushed downstairs and froze. The kitchen was a complete disaster. Food was scattered across the floor. Broken plates covered the room. Cabinets were left open, and everything looked as if a hurricane had torn through the house. His anger exploded. "That's enough," he shouted. "I'm taking both of you home right now." Before he could do anything, his phone suddenly rang. It was a video call from his wife, Karen. Evan instantly forced a smile onto his face and stepped outside. He acted as if everything was completely normal. He laughed, he smiled, and he hid the panic growing inside him. The moment the call ended, he walked back into the house. This time, he firmly ordered Belle and Genesis to get dressed and leave immediately. But instead of listening, the girls walked straight toward Karen's paintings. Without saying a word, they began destroying them. Paintings were ripped apart, artwork was ruined, years of Karen's hard work were destroyed in seconds. Evan completely lost his temper. He threatened to call the police. But Belle didn't look scared. Instead, she slowly walked toward him, smiled, and whispered something that made his blood run cold. "We're underage. If the police come, they won't arrest us. They'll arrest you." The words hit Evan like a truck. His heart dropped. For the first time, he realized this wasn't an accident. He wasn't dealing with two innocent girls. He was trapped in a nightmare that had only just begun. Just as Evan stood there in shock, someone knocked on the front door. His heart skipped a beat.
When he looked through the window, he saw one of Karen's close friends standing outside. Panicking, Evan quickly turned to Belle and Genesis. "Stay inside, don't come out," he whispered. He rushed to the door and tried to act normal. Everything seemed to be under control, until Genesis suddenly walked into the hallway. Without warning, she wrapped her arms around Evan in front of Karen's friend, acting as if they were lovers. The woman stared in disbelief. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. For the first time, he actually dialed the police. The moment the girls heard that, their expressions changed. The playful smiles disappeared. Realizing he was serious, they finally agreed to leave. Not wanting any more trouble, Evan immediately drove them across town and dropped them off outside a house. When he returned home, the silence inside the house felt heavier than ever. The damage was everywhere. Broken furniture, ruined paintings, shattered glass. It looked less like a home and more like the aftermath of a disaster. Late into the night, Evan cleaned everything by himself, hoping he could erase every trace of what had happened. Finally exhausted, he sat down to continue his work. Then, crash! A loud sound of breaking glass echoed through the house. Evan jumped to his feet and ran toward the noise. On the floor, he found his family photo frame smashed into pieces. As he bent down to pick it up, someone attacked him from behind. A powerful blow knocked him unconscious instantly. Everything went black. Everything went black. When Evan slowly opened his eyes, he realized he couldn't move. His hands and feet were tightly tied to a bed. He struggled with all his strength, but the ropes wouldn't budge. Panic took over. He shouted for help, begging Genesis to untie him. Instead of helping, the bedroom door slowly opened. Belle walked in, but the moment Evan looked at her, his face turned pale. She was wearing his daughter's school uniform. The sight horrified him. Fear, guilt, and disgust flooded his face all at once. Then Genesis stepped into the room. The two girls slowly approached him with terrifying smiles. They began pulling at his clothes, while Evan desperately fought against the ropes. The room no longer felt like a house, it felt like a prison. Just then, Evan's phone suddenly started ringing. It was another video call from Karen. Genesis picked up the phone and smiled. Then she looked straight at Evan. "If you don't do exactly what we say, I'll answer this call and tell your wife everything." Evan's heart sank. He had no escape, no way to fight back, no one who could help him. With tears in his eyes and shame written across his face, he was forced to obey. As Belle deliberately tried to provoke him, Genesis quietly recorded everything on her phone. Only then did Evan finally understand the truth. This was never about attraction. This had been a carefully planned trap from the very beginning. Every second, every move, every smile had been leading to this moment. Genesis walked into the kitchen to grab something to eat. For the first time, Evan saw an opportunity. While Belle stayed close to him, he pretended to cooperate. Secretly, he began loosening the ropes around his wrists. Every second mattered. Every movement had to look convincing. Finally, one hand came free. Without wasting another moment, Evan shoved Belle off the bed with all his strength. She crashed onto the floor. Evan jumped up and rushed toward the kitchen, determined to end this nightmare once and for all. But before he could reach Genesis, she struck him from behind. The blow sent him crashing to the floor. Everything went black again. When Evan regained consciousness, he was tied up once more. This time, the girls didn't even pretend to be normal. Their behavior became completely unhinged. They laughed, screamed, danced around the room, and mocked him as if his suffering was nothing more than entertainment. Then they placed headphones over his ears. A deafening blast of music filled his head. The volume was unbearable. Evan screamed in pain, but no one could hear him. The doorbell echoed through the house. Standing outside was Louis, Karen's assistant. Completely unaware of what had happened, he stepped inside, expecting a normal visit. Belle and Genesis greeted him with warm smiles. They calmly introduced themselves as Evan's nieces. At first glance, everything seemed perfectly normal, but something about the house felt off. Louis couldn't explain it. Then he heard it. a faint sound coming from one of the locked rooms. Curious, he slowly walked toward the door. While his attention was elsewhere, Bell and Genesis quietly slipped the asthma inhaler out of his pocket. Lewis never noticed. A second later, he opened the door. Inside, he found Evan tied at the bed, bruised, exhausted, and terrified. Without hesitation, Lewis rushed forward and started untying the ropes. Evan looked at him with desperate eyes, but before he could fully escape, the sound of breaking glass came from another room. Bell and Genesis had started destroying everything around them as if nothing mattered. Then, suddenly, Lewis struggled to breathe. His asthma attack had started. Instinctively, he reached into his pocket for his inhaler. His hand froze. It wasn't there. Only then did the girls exchange a quiet smile. They had been waiting for this moment all along. Lewis gasped for air. His breathing became heavier with every passing second. Desperately, he searched every pocket for his inhaler, but it was gone. Then he looked up. Bell was casually tossing the inhaler to Genesis. Genesis laughed and threw it back. To them, it wasn't an emergency, it was a game. Lewis stumbled forward, reaching for the inhaler, but the girls kept moving it just out of his reach. His lungs were giving up, his vision blurred, panic filled his face. Still, the girls couldn't stop laughing. Then, in a desperate attempt to grab the inhaler, Lewis lost his balance. He slipped. His head slammed violently against a large stone. The impact was devastating. Within seconds, his body stopped moving. Lewis was dead. Evan watched in horror. He couldn't believe what had just happened. But what terrified him even more was the girls' reaction. Instead of panicking, they burst into laughter, as if a man's death meant absolutely nothing to them. Now Evan knew the truth. These weren't reckless girls. They were cold-blooded psychopaths. As if things couldn't get any worse, Bell and Genesis covered Lewis's body with sheets of paper and splashed paint all over it, turning the corpse into what looked like a bizarre art installation. Then they picked up Evan's phone. Using it, they sent messages from Lewis's phone to Karen's phone, carefully creating fake evidence that Lewis and Karen had been having an affair. Their plan was horrifyingly simple. When everything was over, the police would believe Evan discovered the affair and murdered Lewis in a fit of rage. Every piece of evidence, every message, every detail was being arranged to destroy Evan's life forever. While Bell and Genesis were busy setting up the crime scene, Evan desperately searched for a way to escape. Still tied up, he slowly dragged himself across the floor, using only his feet. His eyes locked onto one thing, the iPad. If he could just reach it, maybe he could send Karen a message before it was too late. Inch by inch, he pulled himself closer. Finally, he reached the device. His heart raced as he tried to unlock it with trembling hands, but before he could type a single word, Belle noticed him. In an instant, she snatched the iPad away and hurled it across the room. It slammed into the floor, shattering into pieces. Evan's last chance to call for help was gone. The nightmare only grew worse. The girls began destroying everything in the house. Furniture, windows, paintings, nothing was left untouched. The home that once held Evan's happy family had become a complete ruin. Then they walked outside into the backyard. Without saying a word, they picked up shovels and started digging a deep, wide grave. Evan stared at them in horror. He knew exactly what it was for. His breathing became faster as he screamed for help with everything he had left. But the girls calmly turned around and pointed a gun straight at him. The moment Evan saw the weapon, his voice disappeared. For the first time, he completely gave up. He realized this nightmare wasn't about surviving anymore. It was about how his life would end.
The next morning, Belle and Genesis dragged Evan into the backyard. His hands were tied. His body was covered in bruises. Without saying a word, they threw him into the large pit they had dug the night before. Then they slowly buried him. They covered his entire body with dirt, leaving only his head above the ground. Evan couldn't move. He couldn't escape. All he could do was watch. The two girls sat down in front of him with calm smiles. Finally, they revealed the truth. We're psychopaths. Ruining people's lives is our favorite game. There was no guilt in their voices, no regret, only satisfaction. They admitted that Evan wasn't their first victim. They had targeted married men before and destroyed their lives the exact same way. Everything that had happened, the rain, the flirting, the night, every single moment had been planned from the beginning. Then Genesis picked up Evan's phone and played a video. Evan watched in horror. The video showed Belle wearing his daughter's school uniform while forcing herself on him. But the most horrifying part wasn't the video itself. It was the title, Happy